Cameron, for some of the listeners that watch on YouTube, sometimes I'm recording in a room with a guitar behind me. It's one of my passions. I'm a trashy guitar player. You have guitars on your wall. Cameron's a great guitar player. And I just recently upgraded some pickups in my guitar, and it just sounds heavenly. I bought these things called Seymour Duncan Pearly Gates. Like, I guess Duncans are just, dude, those are the pickups to go with, because I was rocking out last night for a rehearsal and it was glorious. And then this morning, like, you know, when you're just totally feeling a hobby, right? You're like, yeah. I picked up my guitar again and I was like, I just want to play this all day. Like, I can't get anything done. And I was working from home, right? And I was like, I just want to keep hearing it. It's just amazing, glorious sound. When you're hooked, you're hooked. You know, like, it happens with me with guitar stuff and gear. Sometimes it's creating music. Sometimes it's playing video games. And I just feel like I'm in this season of my life where, like, hobbies are just great. Like, I want a hobby vacation or something like that. You know what I mean, Cameron?
I totally get that. I mean, it's kind of tough because you have to find a hobby that you can do, like, intermittently, you know, where it's like you don't have to do it all the time, or like you don't have to be like super committed to it, like sinking a bunch of time into it, which is a little frustrating, I guess. But, you know, that's the way the world works.
Yeah, well, playing guitar is definitely like, oh, you need to put a ton of time into it. Otherwise, it's embarrassing. Like, every time someone hands me a guitar and they're like, yeah, isn't this great? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, don't know what to play on it, because I'm still trying to learn every note on the neck and stuff. I've seen some pretty cool videos lately where it was like, if you know the octaves of bar chords, you know, like 60% of the neck already. And I was like, oh, wait a second. I do know that, you know? So I'm getting there. I'm working on it. But this is not a guitar podcast. It's about movies. Cameron,
do you ever feel like, this is totally random, but do you ever feel like like guitar content is always kind of weird and boring?
No, I don't know. Like, I watch a lot of guitar stuff on YouTube. So I'm obsessed with, I mean, I have major gear acquisition syndrome.
Sure,
so
me too.
Yeah, like the whole idea around pursuing a tone in a guitar that you're like kind of carving out as your own, like it pulls from influences of classic guitarists or people you look up to, right? Like, I have for me, I really enjoy like punk music or alternative rock. So it's not as classy as some people who are like, oh, you know, I want to play a jazz master and get that warm tone that solos along with like a smooth kit. You know, like for me, I'm pursuing that rock sound. And I've always looked up to the guitarist of Blink-182 because he actually put out a documentary called The Pursuit of Tone that was sponsored by Ernie Ball. It's on YouTube. And he's not a great guitarist, but I think his sound is what really carries his like subpar playing, you know? And I think that really influenced me in a way where it's like, I don't have time to study. I'm getting older, so I'm not learning as fast, right? I'm like, if I can have a textural tone that is just to die for, that you want to hear all the time, you know, like I can get by with playing weird stuff. And I've worked with a lot of different guitarists that can shred, and they show up with gear that like sounds just treacherous with a band. But and this is a whole nother conversation. Like, I mean, I could go on and on, right? I use a digital simulator called a Helix. It's something that like emulates the sound of a speaker, amp, and cab with the microphone that's programmed with it. So all I do is plug one line into that and I get that sound. And these other guys are hauling in all this gear because they have that classic mindset. They're like, well, I love Zeppelin, right? I'm gonna get that sound. And it's like their stuff comes out noisy, muddy, and weird because they don't actually know what they're doing with it. And it's like, I'd rather just have that knowledge and understanding of the way sound works with the stuff. It's, again, too long of a question, but I find like when it comes to YouTube content, they're always usually talking around tone or dialing in stuff. So for me, it's like super interesting to hear how some people are like, I usually do a high cut down to 3K, you know, low cut up to 6. You know, that's when you're talking with the digital like the simulator stuff with Kemper, Helix. What's the other one? there's a bunch of them now, but they basically let you do digital parametric EQ stuff inside of your guitar sound, so it sits in the mix just right. So
that was a can of worms.
Cameron, you're the loud amp player, right? You just show up with a noisy thing and
I don't show up to anything anymore because I don't play with anybody. So yeah, I mean,
we got to get you out there. We got to get you back to those high school stadium days, Cameron.
It'd be fun. I mean, I don't have time to put into guitar stuff. So just like what we were saying. In any case, this is Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. My name is Cameron Tuttle, and I am joined today by Isaac Ransom. As always, usually.
I'm blue, da-da-dee, da-da-da. You know, look at me on screen. Good Lord. So, Cameron, you're looking so orange because you got that nice warm thing. For me, I literally look purple. What is happening?
I think it's probably just your screen, but, you know, it doesn't really matter. I'm in a weird lighting situation because the sun is setting right, like, in my window, and then I've got, like, the lights in the background, which are just room lights. So,
yeah.
And it doesn't really matter for this show, but
most people listen, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so today we watched 12 Monkeys. We're continuing Sci-Fi month. It's been a pretty fun ride. We're kind of hitting some smaller or more, I would say, like, off the beaten path kind of hits because for us, we're kind of sci-fi nerds. We're geeks when it comes to this stuff. You know, we've seen all the classics like Star Wars and Blade Runner and you know, everything like that, and the Matrix and whatnot. So. For me, it was important to hit some deeper cuts, some older things, some things that were a little more interesting and sort of on the weirder side of things. So, 12 Monkeys is a Terry Gilliam movie. It's starring Bruce Willis, Brad Pitt, and I can't remember her name. Oh, Madeline Stowe. That's her name. And yeah, it is a very strange, very interesting movie, like most Terry Gilliam movies are. It's one that is based off of a French short film directed by Chris Marker called La Jetée, and it's pretty much loosely based on it. It has the same plot structure in some ways, but it's very sort of, it takes it in a different direction and a fun direction. And I'd like to kind of have a conversation about both of them in some ways. Isaac didn't get a chance to watch La Jetée, so we're focusing mainly on 12 Monkeys, but yeah, this is a very interesting film. I'd like to go into maybe some of the plot themes and sort of the general direction of the movie before we get into anything else. Isaac, you want to take us away?
Yeah. Before we get into the plot and everything, I'm going to shill for a second. If you enjoy the show, you can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Throw a couple dollars our way. You can get access to an exclusive commentary track each month and have your questions read on air. If you're a Patreon, actually, Tim Smith, one of our patrons, wrote on a bunch of questions because we usually don't have many. So, Cameron, can I hit you with one of these real fast before we get to the plot? Sorry to totally derail us, but that's the name of the game good. Sometimes. I will keep it on track with film stuff. He wanted to ask you, Cameron, specifically you, what is your end goal for this podcast? How many shows do you think you'll have covered? How many shows until you think you have covered most of the ground indeed at the start of the show? Do you see the show evolving, and what are your concerns about being another movie podcast? That is a lot of questions. There's even one more. Will you ever interview a podcast in which you'd be the novice compared to the host? So, because Cameron is our expert, right? So he's asking you, where's the show going, right? Have we covered enough ground, or how much ground do you really see going as with me being the novice and as the show's changing around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always came into this podcast as sort of an experiment in a lot of ways of how can I turn someone who is, um, you know, like an avid watcher of all things Marvel and that sort of realm into a cinephile who's interested in sort of older movies or interested in black and white movies or has a taste for those sorts of things. Because for me, I always loved seeing in school or in throughout my friend group or whatever. You introduce them to a certain amount of movies, and I think everybody sort of catches the gene if they all, or catches the bug, I guess, if they all have the if they're interested in movies and they like movies, there's a pathway for you to get into sort of the deeper cuts of things. And so for me, there's just a lot more to go. There's a lot more realm to cover. I think we had kind of a really interesting big step with the Billy Wilder month, personally, because I thought that was a really for you, I felt like that was a pretty pivotal moment in terms of your appreciation of those sorts of things. But where do I see this podcast going? I mean, I think that's really up to, we both really love doing this. So it's something that we enjoy and it's something that we like to do. If it turns out that we get to a point where, we're both sort of, we're not, I think the thing is, you could always learn more. You could always cut deeper. You could always go into more niche and more subcultures and more interesting cuts of things. And for me, the best way to learn about film is exposure to film. It's about watching as many films as possible. So if we could keep it going like this forever, I wouldn't be opposed to that. And I think, we call it an expert and a casual, but I do think I'm still learning. I do think I'm still sort of, normally I probably wouldn't call myself an expert if it weren't for branding and the branding of the show. So for me, I'm still learning when it comes to these episodes. And that's always cool to see, is like, what can we do to sort of stretch our minds? What can we do to push ourselves in this realm of filmmaking? And so, yeah, so that's kind of, a meandering answer to all of the questions, I would say. Did I miss one?
No. I think the only thing I want to add with the evolution of the show is although we always say it's an expert and a casual, really one of the things that I enjoy tapping into is like, what does the normal audience think?
Yeah.
Right? My knowledge has grown because of Cameron's exposure. You're right. Billy Wilder was an important month for me. And I think it made me view kind of old black and white movies substantially differently, compared to what even we had seen up until then. Right? I think this podcast has a large opportunity to change and evolve in ways, but that center thesis of like, what do like real viewers actually think of it? Can they consume this? That conversation will continue. Yeah. One of my favorite episodes that I've done that had been more experimental was Glenn and I's commentary track, he's my brother, around the score of Empire Strikes Back, which I think, if you don't listen to any of the commentary tracks in your Patreon, it's consumable without watching the movie. Most people have seen Empire, right? Like that sort of thing where we're going to branch out, maybe bring in new voices, do different things, like all that stuff's on the table. We're not going to just sit to the formula, but the formula is fun for Cameron and I. At the end of the day, like we're having a lot of fun doing the show. We have a lot of other things going on in our lives and, careers and stuff to pursue. So we're going to keep it there, but there's a ton of headroom to be able to change stuff. So.
And there was one that I didn't answer, which is, would I ever be the novice? And yeah, that's already happened. It's called Whenever Juzo comes on the podcast. And he's always correcting me, Juzo, always correcting me. Because sometimes I get dates wrong. But hey, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, Tim has a lot more questions. We'll probably run through one more at the end of the show that's a little more fun. Again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions. If you want to have your questions read on air, that's why you have that benefit. If you don't have dollars, Cameron and I, we get it. Just give us a rating on iTunes, tell friends and family. That is how the show grows. I'm done with the shilling. I'm glad that we got a chance to answer a question finally after we've been promoting it for like months and no one's written in. Let's get back to the plot. Yeah, let's get back to the plot of 12 Monkeys. So this movie follows Bruce Willis's character stuck in a post-apocalyptic future. He's a prisoner and he's sent on some missions to go up to the surface. Humanity's living underground, and he is sent out to, find specimens. Essentially, this civilization that's barely hanging on to life is looking for the cause of a deadly virus that killed off everyone above the land. That's why they're all hiding underground. And so Bruce Willis is tasked with going back in time to discover some of the origins of this virus. And it's done in a very strange, artistic way with an obsession with like the wide angle lens, which I thought was very funny. And it's a trip, man. Like if you're thinking like kind of in a casual viewer's perspective, right? I was thinking about that scene in like Avengers Infinity War where they show like the timeline and all the different timelines split, right? This movie really has fun with time and kind of like what is the start and what is the finish, and there's all these flashbacks very well weaved together in something that comes out to be just sort of like an enjoyable ride. It's engaging. It's there's some great acting performances. I had never seen Brad Pitt act this way, and I loved it.
Yeah, he's great in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that summarizes it enough, or do we want to start giving away the ending? Because I don't really want to.
No, I think that's a great place to start. I would say, just on top of that, kind of the crux of this movie, which is sort of the time travel element, comes down a lot to the fact that when you, in this universe, when you travel back in time, you're really disoriented. And that is taken directly from La Jetée. So I'll explain it a little bit for you, where in La Jetée, they say essentially like if you don't have a strong mind and a strong will, you're just going to go crazy. Like they say your body and your mind can't exist in two different times.
Right.
And so this movie that's kind of mostly what this movie experiments with, is the idea of sort of someone who is completely unused to the time period that they're sent back to, being like extremely disoriented, acting in a highly volatile and in a manner that you would consider someone nowadays, if they were acting like that, you would consider them to be crazy. So that's a fun part of the premise, and it's also one that I think isn't really experimented with all that much. It's very like you when you time travel in these movies, it's like, oh, we just go back and everything's normal. It doesn't really matter that I'm dressed completely differently, or that I'm, talking in a completely different accent, or that, whatever else. And yeah, it's pretty impressive that this like strange, odd, off the wall, very it has a very like difficult structure, I would say, in terms of like what things are happening and what everything's weaved together by. You're kind of, it's kind of jerky in some ways, because he's like stuck in a place for a couple scenes, and then he's whisked away, and there's a lot of things that happen, and then there's like really frenetic scenes where he's acting crazy and whatnot, and then so it's very interesting that that's able to sort of captivate you and keep you hooked in. And like you said, I think part of it has to do with Bruce Willis's performance and Brad Pitt's performance. I think they're just really, really excellent in this movie. I do want to talk about, you mentioned the wide angles and I would say also the Dutch angles. These are very Terry Gilliam. This is like stylistically a Terry Gilliam movie. So just for reference there, it's very much in his canon. It's very much in his way of telling stories is to be sort of wild with the camera, be a little bit loose, be a little bit off the wall in terms of the script and in terms of the way things flow in a scene. And I think this movie does a really good job of like keeping you guessing, I guess.
Yeah, I would say I found the interesting, artsy, more like quote unquote confusing elements in the film to actually be cohesive throughout. And it was like you're exposed to it pretty early on. You learn to just deal with it as a viewer, and then it kind of just continues to make sense. Even up until the point where like Bruce Willis ends up in the Civil War. Yeah. You're not even really like...
Or World War... It's World War One.
Sorry. World War One. You're not even confused. You know, like, it's like, okay, he's just there now. And I accept it. But it has a lot to do with those early moments in the film where they're like, this is the style. And it's also very weird. Like, there's that Tokyo jungle looking scene with all the animals outside, you know, when he goes up above the surface and there's all those like zoo animals and stuff. And I'm like, what the, like, that was the moment where I was like, what the heck is happening? But I'm kind of bought in, you know? And so from there on out, I'm like, just take me away. Whatever you want to do, take me away. I'm in it for the ride. And I think this movie has a good pace, and it's pretty solid all around. I also want to say that the last 30 minutes, because it was getting late. Usually when I'm watching a movie past midnight, like it hit midnight and I was like 30 minutes to go. Like it felt like a blink of an eye. The last half hour is like extremely engaging. It's done in a second and you're like, what happened in the half hour, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and I mean, that's where a lot of the sort of the payoffs and the twists sort of unfold is in the last 30 minutes. And it's really, really brilliantly done. I mean, it's everything. You see you see the setup of what's happening. You know, you see everything sort of the pieces align, and then when it all clicks together, it's like it's done in such an effective way. I really, really like that last sequence. That sequence and some of the stuff in the beginning are very similar to La Jetée. And so that's kind of where it's heavily based off of. That's maybe the most where it takes from, is that sort of end twist and the intrigue around there.
Well, Cameron, before we get into the spoilers and conclusion stuff, because we'll warn you before we get into that.
Yeah.
I want to get into maybe some of the technical facts or interesting things about this film that we can point out without really digging our teeth into the plot, interpretation of stuff, right? Take us there before we really give away the ending.
Yeah, so this film was bought by... oh no, now I'm going to forget. It was basically optioned from Chris Marker and his original story because one of the producers was a big fan of La Jetée. And so they had to kind of petition Marker for the rights to the movie. And he obviously got a screenplay credit, but they approached Terry Gilliam about it, and I don't know. It's kind of I guess it's kind of an interesting way that his career worked. I'm not like a huge Terry Gilliam connoisseur or anything, so if I get any of this wrong, I apologize. But he started off on Monty Python, and so that's sort of what he did in the 70s, and that was his thrust. And then he started directing, and he made I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Brazil, Isaac?
I have not, no.
Yeah, so he made Brazil in 1985, and then he he would go on mostly to make, he basically made Brazil, the 12 Monkeys, and pretty much all Monty Python movies. And
and also Brazil. Don't forget about Brazil.
And that movie, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which is the last Heath Ledger movie?
No, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, he also directed that. So,
okay.
In any case, that's his trajectory. He started off, in comedy and in that world of things, and then he made a couple pretty serious and not very funny, dramatic sci-fi movies. And but one of the things about it is he's as a filmmaker, you can kind of tell that his with the pace of his movies and with the sort of frantic energy of his movies, you could tell that he came from Monty Python. I don't know. Are you particularly familiar with Monty Python?
No, I've watched a little bit of The Life of Brian and, of course, The Holy Grail.
Yeah. But do you kind of get that it's like the same energy, a similar energy in some ways?
A little bit, actually, now that you mention it, because the way that this movie is like cut up from scene to scene does have a little bit of what you're saying.
Yeah. He also, a couple of years ago, he made a movie called Don Quixote, and I saw it at a film festival, and it wasn't very good. So, not.
I was gonna say, I think maybe it was the asylum scene and stuff, but I was like, I feel like this guy could make a pretty good, quirky '90s Batman movie, and I don't know. I just there was a little bit of that energy with it, and I don't know. Like I was like, maybe he did. That's kind of where my head was at. I didn't know who the director was, so
yeah. This was sort of a smaller budget movie, although it's not like tiny, I guess. People ended up taking pay cuts to work on this film, which is obviously usually that's a sign of a director who's in great demand, is when people are like they're willing to forego their usual rates. But yeah, for the most part, I don't have anything all that technical. It's kind of, for me, the more interesting part of this movie is to get into the spoilers, unfortunately. So,
well, yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, it's old. It's from the 80s, so go watch it. My dad loves this movie, so there's a recommendation that you can stand by. But yeah, so let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about sort of the full circle and maybe some interpretation stuff. Cameron, tell us about the end of the plot, the tying of the bow, and those moments that really stood out to you.
Yeah, so the crux of this movie centers around Bruce Willis's character, and throughout the movie you see him have sort of either a dream or a flashback. It's not really all that clear from just the movie itself. And it's a flashback of someone in an airport, someone running down with a gun in the airport, and they're shooting at him. And in La Jetée, there's voiceover where it says basically, this is when I first realized that I saw a dead man, basically. So that's kind of the significance, or to highlight the significance of that scene for him, for his character. It's something that he always dreams about and thinks about. And so what ends up happening is they're trying to stop or apprehend a man from stealing and distributing the deadly virus on these planes. And up to this point in the movie, you really start, you're kind of led on to this red herring about that it's the army of the 12 monkeys, that it's the group that Brad Pitt is the group that Brad Pitt is leading, and he is pretty off the wall, and he is pretty crazy, I guess. But you throughout the movie, you're kind of led on to believe that, like, oh, not only did, Brad Pitt and the Army of the 12 Monkeys start this virus, but Bruce Willis was actually the one who suggested it in the first place, starting off this sort of chain reaction. But by the end, you realize that it's a guy who's kind of been hiding in plain sight all along. It's the assistant to the virologist, and the characters realize that too. And what plays out is the dream in Bruce Willis's head, and Bruce Willis is the man who he sees get shot in the future, and it's sort of this circular time loop,
right?
That is very intriguing, and it's your life coming full circle of you watching as a kid, your own death. So
what I think is interesting, part of it is that I'm not the most bright movie watcher, right? But I thought that this film ended with sort of no conclusion to the virus thing. For some reason, the lady that sits down at the plane on the plane with the guy who's carrying the vials that are deadly, right? It didn't click in my brain that she was from the future. I was like, oh, it's that lady again, but she's not. Like, she was like, oh, I'm in insurance or something. I'm like, is she like I don't understand. Is it another one of those coincidence things? I actually thought that the final statement of the film was almost like this purgatory loop or something like that, where it was like he is stuck endlessly watching his own death or being killed, and then the loop starts again and again and again, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, that ending statement minus the resolution was pretty dark for me, like, walking out of it. Even with the resolution, it doesn't really, save the sort of dark undertone that Bruce Willis's character.
Well, that loop still exists. I mean, whether or not, it gets broken in the future. I mean, that is what we watch. That loop is what we see. So,
yeah, and even if they get like the solution to this virus, right? It still plays into like Willis's character being misunderstood and used by almost everyone around him, and how he's like subjected to this torturous loop, and then also like just being used. I don't know, like there's like all these underpinnings, and then there's also like this conversation around mental health that they spend a good portion of the first half of the film on, right? Where it's like he's institutionalized for being mentally insane because he's from the future, but like what choice did he have?
Well, and it doesn't really show it in the beginning, but when he gets zapped back to the future, he's just dropped without clothes. He's just he's just dropped naked, and I'm sure he's disoriented. And he's in the jail cell, and he's like drooling all over himself. So like he's obviously, he's in a bad state when he gets to 1990 or whatever. And that's a fun, interesting part of the movie too, because he's like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, if I'm here, this is the wrong time. Like this is, and so he's kind of helpless in that way. And yeah, throughout the movie, it's kind of interesting because he both has complete agency in that he does like, he does so much to like activate the plot, or he does like so much like as a character. He's moving things along a lot. He's not like an inactive character, but at the same time, in terms of the story and in terms of the movie, like he doesn't have any agency at all as a character. Even if he does do what he's supposed to do or not do what he's supposed to do, which he does both at different times in the movie, he's still either just a pawn or doomed to this sort of endless loop. which I guess is, like you said, it's a pretty bleak outlook in some ways. But it's also kind of interesting because, with these time travel movies, there's the idea about the ability to change the past, or the idea of the grandfather paradox, or if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, could you go back in time to kill your grandfather, right? And this movie kind of sidesteps that, I would say, in a little bit, where it basically says you're yes, maybe you could affect the future, but as in terms of your individual story, you're pretty much pressed in. And Bruce Willis finds that he's, as much as he tries to get away from his own story, he falls right into his own trap, basically.
Yeah, I've seen sci-fi movies like this before that have not done it well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to embrace these larger than life questions in the setting of science fiction or post-apocalyptic looking stuff, right? And I think that fallen Earth situation is prone to have people sort of, like consider humanity and life and choice, right? But what I enjoyed about 12 Monkeys is that it had those moments, but it also had like so much joy in like the small tastes of like what's good about life now. And the statements at the end of the film, or the stuff you can walk away with, is direct and also kind of open to interpretation, like in a good way. There's a lot of movies that are like, what are they saying? It could mean anything, we watched Kubrick's Space Odyssey, right? And the ending of that, like, I guess maybe there's a understanding for it, but in my eyes, I'm like, you could say anything you want about this movie and almost make it work,
Yeah.
Which is me basically giving up on interpretation. This film does not make me want to give up. This film is like, I think I'm getting it, and I want to watch it again, and I'm sort of pulling these ideas out of like concepts that Bruce Willis's character is facing in his journey, where he's like, I would rather just run away, or this moment where I can enjoy music. I love music. You know what I mean? Like there's these small snippets where he's like, he's almost speaking into valuing life, right?
Or when he starts to accept that he is crazy, which is another really interesting pivot to his character, when he starts to be like, I'm different. I'm just I understand that what I think is not real, and it's like, but we know as. I mean, in some ways you could interpret this movie as all being in his head, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's a very interesting interpretation of the movie, personally. But
it is cool that it could almost work.
Yeah.
You could write a paper about this film and have it be two different films, like all together, right?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't seem like that in the first viewing, but it's weird. Like there's even statements in this film script where they're like, going back and seeing things a second time or something, like all the scenes with him in the metal chair and the scientist poking at him are little snippets of exposition almost thrown at you as the audience, like to look for certain things. I thought the setup at the airport at the ending was bound to come. Like I wasn't surprised by it.
No,
right? They had been teasing it the entire film. What I found the most intriguing was all the involvement from the future stuff in that scene, like his buddy showing up randomly, and giving all this commentary about what's been happening.
And he calls the mattress, the quote unquote mattress supply people, and the guy comes in and he's like, "Here, take this. Like you gotta go. Like you gotta kill that guy." Basically.
Yeah.
Why'd you take your teeth out, man? Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's like also to go along with the kinetic energy of the film, right? They are wearing those wild costumes, like Bruce Willis with his like mustache and glasses and looking hair, like so cool. And he's wielding that like the big revolver, you know. It's just, it sticks with you. Like that ending scene just sticks with you. All the characters in the faces, like for some reason that guy with the orange hair who's actually like wielding the virus is so off-putting and memorable, and I love it.
And you see the first time you see it, you know something's off with that dude. You know, you're like, geez, that guy's like really a creep. You know, like you think that this is like, you get the inkling of him being sort of part of the bad guy, and then you see him again. You know, they hinted again when he's when he's like this, you find out that he's the assistant virologist, you know, the assistant who's working on this deadly disease. And that's where you get the setup to the twist, you know, that's where you kind of get that being like, oh, like this is what's going to happen. You know, you get that setup of, instead of Brad Pitt, it's, you know, obviously going to be this creepy dude. That's who's going to be. And then the third setup, I guess, is kind of the revelation where he names all of the cities, you know, that he's going to. Or the lady who's checking him in names all the cities, which is a great, you know, like there's so many little moments of interesting storytelling of like setups and payoffs and, you know, in this movie. And I find that to be sort of its strong suit in a lot of ways. I think one of the struggles for me with this movie is like that a lot of the dialogue is not very good. And just some of the script feels a little rough around the edges sometimes, which is okay because I think the general thrust of the movie and the general, you know, what you get from the movie is really interesting and really fun. And, you know, and Gilliam is a very skilled and talented director where he's able to make, you know, keep things interesting, even if some things are a little weird or a little off-putting. Like for me, that ending sequence where he's like, you know, he gets shot and he's like laying on the ground and he's still in the mustache and the glasses and the wig. And like, you know, she comes over and she like kisses him and it's like super dramatic. Like that, to me, that's Gilliam making fun of himself and his own like filmmaking and making fun of that sort of trope in these movies. Cause he's a really humorous guy. I mean,
yeah, that shot that's just like on the kid's eyes for like way too long. You're like, okay, are you going to cut anytime soon here? Nope. Yeah. You're just going to stay on it. Right.
But it's effective too, you know, like that's what's fun about it is like, he's so talented in drawing that thin line, you know, where it's like on the one hand, yeah, it's completely ridiculous. This whole story and this whole idea is completely ridiculous. But on the other hand, you're strung along, you know, you are totally into it. You know, and especially I do want to get into Brad Pitt because I think we kind of glossed over him. He is kind of, for me, one of the linchpins of this movie for it being as effective as it is. Because his performance is like off the chain. He is like incredible in this movie. And everything he does is so unpredictable. It's so wild. You don't know what he's going to do next. You don't know where he's going to turn, that he's the perfect red herring. You know what I mean? Like he's the perfect one to be like, okay, like we're suspicious of him. You're supposed to be suspicious of him. And also, you know, that interaction in the insane asylum beforehand is so like, you know, he's helping Bruce Willis, but he also is completely nuts and obviously like, you know, that whole sequence where he's like, oh yeah, killing everybody in the world. That seems like a bit of a long-term goal, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah, it's so funny to watch, and like it's like just straight enjoyable. Like his introduction with the chair and stuff, and his strange like nonstop commentary about the world and TV and like corporate living and the whole structure of the insane asylum and stuff.
He's like, you play games, and that's just as good as getting drugged up.
yeah. He's great. I found him in the later parts of the film not as fun as he is in that first introduction.
Yeah.
In the insane asylum, but he serves the plot well. I think his conclusion of what the 12 monkeys end up doing is great, and it's a cool payoff too. Again, with that like Tokyo jungle thing, with the animals running loose in the city and all that.
Yeah, that's like, that's sort of the opening shot or one of the opening sequences in the movie is him going outside, seeing the bear in front of City Hall, seeing the lion on top of the mall or whatever, and like that is an interesting, like I said, there's so many really good and fun payoffs in this movie if you're paying attention to it. Yeah, I guess let's talk a little bit about Le Jeté. I do want you to watch it at some point because I think it would be an interesting comparison to this movie. But, Le Jeté is pretty weird. It's pretty strange, and it was definitely weird for the time because it is, and I didn't tell you this because I was hoping you were going to watch it, but I'll tell you now. It's fine.
I'm sorry. It was just a scheduling thing.
No, yeah, it's okay. Le Jeté is all frames, all pictures. The movie is entirely basically a slideshow. And the storytelling is really fun because, you think that and you're like, oh, that seems like kind of lazy, right? Of just being a slideshow. But really it's actually impressively well done because the cinematography and the mise en scène in the movie is like really amazing. It's like genuinely something that is super cool to watch and super interesting. And you get the sense that this was like put together in sort of like the post-apocalypse too. You get the sense that the storytelling is from the perspective of someone who's lived through it, or from the perspective that it's been there. I really think it's super interesting. And then the crux of the movie comes from this same interaction where in the beginning of the movie he says, when I was 10 or whatever, I was on the airport and I saw a man running, and the and the guards were chasing, and they shot the man, and that was the first time that I had ever seen someone die in front of me, and I'll always remember like the face of this woman. And then Paris was bombed, and it gets like you get sort of a huge montage of like the aftermath of a nuked Paris, and then this guy, this narrator, is explaining how he was chosen for a program to go back in time and to stop whatever's about to happen. And you find out in the end that lo and behold, the person who was shot at the beginning, who sort of sets off this chain of events, is this man, is the same guy. So that's sort of where the story comes from, and it's not quite as like in depth developed, I guess. It's not quite as there's more to it because it's only a short film, so there's more to it in 12 Monkeys. But I just find it really interesting that like I think the story of that sort of time loop is intriguing to audiences, and is something that could probably be done again, or they made a 12 Monkeys TV show as well, and I was thinking watching this like, it probably would be interesting to see like more of Bruce Willis in 1990, or more of Bruce Willis as he goes back to World War I, or so, you know what I mean? Like that could be an interesting expansion. I think it would break the pace of this movie, and the pace is so good that you don't really want to mess with it. But I don't know. That's sort of my small thing about Le Jeté. Is it's a very interesting experiment in the idea of storytelling with single frames, and what that can do for your characters and for your story.
Well, I may end up still watching it for the commentary track. I might do a commentary with Glenn over it. But if my brother feels like watching something else, we might just do a commentary track over another film. So yeah, but actually it does sound interesting, Cameron. Even though it was just frames, I was glad you were hiding that from me, but the way you talk about it still makes it sound quite neat. So it's funny you brought up having a sequel or something. I couldn't stop thinking about like Looper with Bruce Willis, and just when you're thinking about time loops and stuff, he's into it, I guess, or something. I don't know, because he's in that movie, so maybe that's his thing. I have no idea.
And he hasn't aged a day, so he looks like he's in a time loop.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, his performance is great. I think Brad Pitt is worth the price of admission.
Yeah,
because you're going to see him early on, and you'll be hooked at that point. And then Bruce Willis's character gets more complex after the asylum, and then then the movie ends. And
he's pretty off the chain too, and like you were shocked by some of the things that he does, and you. Like, there's definitely a fake out during the middle where you think that he's murdered the doctor lady.
Yeah.
And it's totally believable too, because you're like, dude, this guy is crazy. He like kidnaps her, he like ties her to the bed and whatnot. And like, and so you, that's a fun B plot as well, because you get the sense that obviously, in the context of the world, in 1996, Bruce Willis's would be looked at as like a crazy kidnapper and as someone who's like, like totally off the rails.
Yeah. I thought everything with like the hobo underground place and like the actual home of the 12 Monkeys, that weird shop, like all that stuff was. Like, I felt like I was leaning into my TV screen, I'm like, I want to see what's around every corner, and it's very tense and on edge, and nobody knows what's happening. But it's fascinating to think, like, the end of the world is coming from such a, like, rough area in the neighborhood. Like, it's like there's stuff you can break down and pull from that, right? Like, where it's like society is crumbling already, like it's already happened and no one was noticing. So yeah, there's a lot to enjoy about this movie. I'm sure there's a lot of different thesis ideas you can pull if you were writing about film and whatnot, things you can apply or look at in your own sort of life and perspective. Cameron, do you want to get to recommendations? Because I think we're just about at the point I think people know where we're at.
Yeah. Well, why don't you go first? Because I'm interested to see what you think.
Yeah, I think that this movie's actually for everyone, and I'm surprised that I'm saying that, because it is a little weird. It's a little strange. It's kind of out there. But I find it difficult to imagine anybody watching this film and like absolutely just not enjoying any of it at all. Like,
yeah,
even for the person with the shortest attention span, it has this frenetic pace that keeps you hooked. And if you're bored by the obnoxiousness of that, you'll at least be kind of surprised by the direction of the plot or the payoffs or the acting performances with Brad Pitt and stuff. There's a bunch to enjoy. Even though I'm giving it a rating of for everyone, I don't know if this movie is like one of my all-time favorites, Like, it's not like this movie that I'm like, I'm dying to watch again, or it's sticking with me, but it kind of is, like it's sort of this lingering thing where there are these small bits that are really like stand out, from the ending to, the doctor lady painting on the wall, like the 12 monkeys live here, the animals in the city, like all that stuff. I'm like, yeah,
her being the one to call the carpet company and
right,
Merry Christmas. Yeah, it's like, yeah,
it feels like it should be more iconic. If I'm being honest,
I agree. I actually totally agree with that. I kind of think this movie is a little bit underrated, honestly.
Yeah.
Like people don't really think about it or consider it all that much. Yeah, you know what? I was leaning towards for the for everyone, or for what's the one above everyone?
Like the casuals.
Yeah, I was kind of in between them. I get what you mean, though. I think about a movie when I watched this movie this time. I thought about it in terms of, like my feeling of watching Tenet. You know, where it's like a very complex plot, something that you know, deals with time and time travel and sort of different time warps and loops and, you know, whatever else. And Tenet is such a less enjoyable movie than this, and it's less understandable. You don't really get what's going on most of the time. And that was a movie that's kind of, I think, geared towards like a mostly casual audience, or mostly like an action blockbuster audience. This movie, I think, is kind of more underground nowadays, but is way more approachable and way more enjoyable than a movie like Tenet. Like, it's totally like Back to the Future, where it's like they don't care about the actual like they don't really care about like the science or the technology or anything like in detail about the time travel. Like, that doesn't really matter at all. They just like do it because that's the plot, you know? So like it's totally accessible in that way, and it's not like a movie like Primer or something where it's like, what is happening? Like, where are they? What time zone are they in? Or even like Tenet, where it's like, wait, I know they're backwards, but why are they, where do they, what's happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like I felt weird giving it the for everyone rating, but one of the things I noticed in viewing it is my dad's a big fan of this film, but my parents go to bed at like 10. Like, that is like on the dot. That's just like who they are, right? But we started watching this at 10, and my dad's like, let's stay up for half an hour. Like, I really want to watch this movie because I like it, you know? And we're watching it, and my mom always falls asleep in movies, like always. But she was like wide eye, like,
yeah,
I'm into this, you know? And as soon as like Brad Pitt was on screen, she's like, this is so funny. Like, I love this guy. Like, I'm totally. And then, you know, 12 or 10:45 rolls around. My dad's like, okay, I got to go to sleep because I got work in the morning. And my mom was like, oh, like, I just kind of want to sit here and watch the rest. She doesn't like sci-fi movies that much, you know? So I was like, there's something about it. There's something about it that's really appealing. I wouldn't feel weird recommending this movie to anyone, you know?
Yeah.
If you like are absolutely terrified of sci-fi or any conversation around like mental health or anything, I don't know, like, I'm sure there's someone out there that hates this movie or thinks it's just like this quirky mess. But I think to most people, I would say to most people, they could at least get through it and be like, okay, like, there was some stuff I found that I liked or didn't like, and, you know, it's not going to be this unbearable experience. You know, I think it has a charm, a pace, and an execution that is just sort of universal.
Yeah.
Despite the weirdness. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
it's like charming quirk. You know what I mean? It's not inaccessible. It's not like like that movie. I'm thinking of Ending Things. You know, where it's like that is a movie that is super inaccessible because of its weirdness. But this movie is like totally the opposite. It's you kind of lean in and enjoy it more because it's weird, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Cameron, you have a shot of the film?
I really like that. I really like the World War I sequence. I think that's like kind of interesting, and like there's some fun visual storytelling in there. I don't know. I feel why don't you go? Because I'll think about it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed most of the stuff with the animals. There was a shot of the lion roaring on top of the building, but the scene with the giraffes on the highway when they're like on the like that's super cool looking. Like it could be a poster that you find in the back of Ross, you know, like just.
I love the I also love the shot of him you know, where he's like dangling Brad Pitt off of the ledge and like everybody's in the background and they're all like they all notice them having like a fight upstairs and they all like turn around. I love that shot.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a really good one. So
that what happened to his eye?
Brad Pitt's eye?
Yeah, there's like this, like his eye is like red, like one eye.
They don't really explain it.
I know, but like the cover of the 12 Monkeys movie has like that red eye, you know?
Yeah.
I'm just like, what happened? Like, did he get like a robo techno eye or something? And then like later in the movie, it doesn't seem like the eye thing is noticeable as much. But with the scene in the mansion, like he has like this flaming like left eye or something like that. So, yeah, I was confused by that, but maybe it's just I don't know. Maybe he had two crazy eyes the whole time.
I don't know. It was kind of something I forgot about and didn't really think about. So
it's all good. Yeah, there's a ton of wide angle stuff done in this. To all those camera people that are like only shooting on ultra wide, stop. This is like I'm gonna go on a tangent here. I do film stuff for work. In my eyes, if it's wide, it's ugly. That's how I feel about most wide shots. This film does a good job, like balancing the stuff with the wide. But in most cases, I absolutely hate wide shots.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, it's not really. You could do a really good job with wide shots. It just has to be. It takes more skill. We've talked about this before. It takes more effort and skill to do something good in a wide.
100%. And so I think that's what makes like. I kind of feel like that's why there are a heavy use of like Dutch angles and things like that, because they're trying to make it work with the wide shots. You know, there's that. You think about like the wide that's up in the corner of the room, almost like a security camera in the insane asylum where Bruce Willis's character just goes missing, like the Houdini moment, right?
Yeah. When it like pans up and there's the ceiling vent. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're making so much use of the space and the angle. Like you feel that security camera feeling, right? When they're putting up there, it's utilizing the wide correctly. And
it's like pretty voyeuristic too. You know, a lot of it feels like there's someone watching Bruce Willis because there is, you know?
Yeah. And all those different, like, can we just comment like the weird ball that talks to him with all the different heads and eyes and things when he's strapped in that chair, the metal ball with the different scientists speaking to him.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It reminded me design. Of, you know, Shark Boy and Lava Girl, the George Lopez robot.
Yes. I mean, maybe that's where they got it from. They were like, we love 12 Monkeys. No, George Lopez walked up and said, I love 12 Monkeys. You're going to give me one of these.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so overall, check it out. It's good. It's worth it. It's fun. I'm surprised. Not many people know about this movie. Yeah. So good way to continue the trend in sci-fi. I got to say, Cameron, at least you've been a little chronological, right? We've started in the past with Metropolis, Space Odyssey. You know, we're in the 80s with RoboCop, and now here we're in the 90s. Where are we headed? We're going with this next episode, and we might be going a little bit further into sci-fi into next month.
Yeah, we'll do two Patreon choices, and I want to do modern sci-fi films. I think it would be fun to do. You know, there's so many on the list. That's why I couldn't choose really. So you know, I'll post both of those tonight and the night that we're shooting this. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be really. It should be fun. I think there's so many good modern sci-fi movies. There's like it's kind of insane. There's just like too many good modern sci-fi movies. So
yeah, well, I'm excited to get into some modern territory, and this was a pleasant surprise, most definitely. So It's been good, Cameron. It's been good to do some sci-fi stuff. Should we close the show with a question from our only write-in Patreon?
Let's do it.
Let's see what Tim Smith has got for us here. All right. Let's see. Oh my goodness. All right, here we go, Cameron. Another question about the show. Tim Smith asks, any chance of having 2 episodes per week? You could split my idea. One episode would be movie review and the other could be around movie news. Cameron, is it possible?
Not right now. Let's say this. If we have a Patreon goal of 2,000 patrons a month, then we could do it.
No. I'll put it at this for our listeners. If we can get a Patreon goal of, let's do this is a reach. This is a big reach. I'm going to say 30 patrons. If we can have 30 patrons, I'll talk to Juzo about doing a movie news show for us. So we have 2 episodes a week. I'm not saying that he's going to do it, but I'm saying I would ask him. I'm not going to ask him until we hit that number. So, and you know what? He's probably screaming in his chair right now. He's like, stop shilling for Patreon. Stop shilling for Patreon. And even if we get to 30 patrons, Juzo's going to say no because you shilled way too much. So again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions.
He would, I'm going to be honest, he would have to host that show because he keeps track of things more than I do.
Oh, I know. That's why he'd be the perfect pick for it.
He would.
So.
He would.
Yeah. I think that wraps it up. We post every Monday, and we got a bunch more sci-fi coming your way. Make sure to check out all the stuff and tell friends and family. We think the show's good. If you have feedback, too, you can reach out to us, message us, message our Instagram. All our social stuff is ECFS Productions. So we'd love to get to know you, even if you can't support us financially. We're just trying to make the show grow and be the best it can for you guys. So post every Monday, and we'll see you next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.